Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you on Tag Tuesday. A little bit of an unexpected tag for me. I was watching Josh at Literary Gladiators when he did the New York Times by the book tag, updated for 2021. And I did the New York Times by the book tag, I think, 4 years ago. I think I did it in 2016 or early 2017. And I don't think I've done it since then. When Josh makes a great point, it is infinitely adaptable. There are some questions that you'll answer the same from year to year, but a lot of them not. A lot of them are book specific. So I thought I'd do a 2021 version, maybe even a January 2021 version of the New York Times by the book tag. Just a series of bookish questions, the type that I love. I don't think I have any. No, I don't have any props for you, so you're just going to have to listen to me drone. Question number one is, what book is on your nightstand now? And if I remember correctly, all those years ago when I made my original version of this tag, I pointed out what all of you have come to know by now, which is that my nightstand is not static. It changes every day. I do an enormous amount of reading. It's all I do, aside from take care of Frida, my little dog. It's all I do. So whereas a normal reader could put a book on their nightstand and it could sit there for weeks, that is never true for me. So the books change all the time, and that's why this answer would be different tomorrow. But I do have some. I listed a bunch of books here on the iPad. I listed a bunch of books to remind me, make sure I didn't miss any. The ones that are on my nightstand now, and that'll be for this afternoon and tonight and all of tomorrow. It looks like we're going to have snow tomorrow, so there'll be an extra fun feeling of cuddling up and reading. The ones I have on the bookshelf now, on the nightstand now, are Ground Zero by Alan Gratz, which is a thriller that apparently is written in two different timelines. One, a young man who is in one of the towers of the Twin Towers when the planes hit, has to make it out alive. And I'm gathering from what little I know about the plot is that his plot line will eventually go on to entwine with the plot line of a young woman in Afghanistan. I don't know how that will work. I've read almost no good 9/11 fiction. I certainly haven't read the great novel about the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Maybe that's not going to happen, or maybe it's not going to happen in my lifetime. I've read a lot of great nonfiction on the subject, but I haven't read, aside from maybe the Martin Amis of all people did a short story about Mohammed Atta that was very good. But I've read scarcely anything else. It'd be interesting to see how Alan Gratz conveys being inside the towers when these things happen. We know a lot of the drama. Maybe that's why no one has written the novels, because we know a lot of the drama firsthand from phone recordings that are absolutely horrifying. They'll haunt you to your dying day. There are phone recordings of a guy talking on behalf of a group of people on one of the doomed floors, and he is on the line when the tower collapses. You hear the rumble, and you hear him and everyone else in the room cry out. They know something catastrophic is happening, probably the floor is going out from underneath them, and then that's it. But for me, probably the most heartbreaking of those now posthumous messages is a young trader talking to his father and saying, something that was absolutely true, which is that when the first tower was hit, everybody started leaving both towers. Obviously, people from the first tower started evacuating, but people from the second tower started evacuating as well. And a lot of them were turned back. A lot of them were told by security once they got down to the lobby, go back up to your office. There's no danger. There's no structural damage coming from that building to affect this building. Of course, during those initial moments, those 40 minutes, no one could even conceive that a second plane would hit the second building. And so maybe you can exonerate the security guys. Maybe they were just thinking the last thing that the cops and the EMTs are going to want on the scene is a crowd of people streaming out of this building when there's no need for it. Maybe those security people were thinking that they were thinking, I'm thinking of the rescue people who are coming. You can hear them, sirens by the hundreds coming. If these people don't have to be out on the sidewalks milling around, better to have them back in their offices. And this kid obeyed, and so many other people did too. And when the second tower was struck and he was trapped, and all of them there were no working staircases, they couldn't get down, the heat was rising, they knew they were going to die. Plenty of them got on the line with 911 or police dispatch or whatever, and knew they were going to die. And this kid keeps saying to his father over and over again, why did I listen? Why did I come back into this building? Why did I do that? I would have lived a long and happy life if I hadn't listened to that security guard making $12 an hour. That is so heartbreaking that maybe it's more heartbreaking than any fiction can be. Maybe that's why there's been nothing that takes us, so little that takes us directly inside the experience. We'll see if Ground Zero by Alan Gratz is anything good or anything to write about it. I will be sure to tell you. The next one is Survivors. The Survivors by Jane Harper, the author of The Dry, kind of Australian noir thriller writer who's got a lot of good word of mouth. She has a loyal following by now. I gave the review copy of The Survivors to a fan of hers, and a fan of just thriller writing and mystery writing just in general, and that fan was not impressed. Said this was a lackluster book. I gave her the review copy because I am expecting to get the finished copy. I will read it myself, and I'll have my guard up because this is a person who knows a hack from a handsaw and wouldn't tell me that the book was disappointing unless it genuinely was. So we will see. It's a little bit alarming to think this is an author who's gone from strength to strength. So, and then finally, the last of them is A World Without Email by Cal Newport, the author of Digital Minimalism and something of an academic super hottie. Digital Minimalism came out, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and in Digital Minimalism, he lays out his rallying cry that we're all too hooked into social media, that it's marketed itself successfully in our minds as being indispensable, and it's not. It's not at all. And he wants his readers to know that it's not, that it's actually harmful, and that you can unplug from it. You can do almost no association. At the time of Digital Minimalism, when he was on his book tour, he was happy to tell audiences that he doesn't have any social media accounts, and that he only checks his email once in a blue moon. And yet he's a published author and a success, and a working professional as well. And he said it's an illusion that you can't have those things. You can. It's an illusion. It's a lie. It's a marketing lie that you need social media for any of that. Now, when I was reading Digital Minimalism, and I think I reviewed Digital Minimalism, and when I was hearing he has a couple of talks on YouTube, I was thinking, okay, I get your point, but this is just stupidly naive, and also not his intention, but nevertheless, it's incredibly condescending. It's I don't know what it says about Cal Newport himself, but it says a lot about the people he thinks are in his audience that he seems to assume have no self-control at all. Obviously, saying that you can do without digital media, well, of course you can. Of course we could all do without social media, but why would we want to? Why would we want to? I know this that puts me in the hinterland here, but I think that the benefits of social media are astronomically greater than the drawbacks. Astronomically greater. Saying that it's pernicious and harmful because a lot of people or a few people or however many people misuse it is just blind. It's just a wrong way to characterize it. None of us would know each other if not for social media. I wouldn't have attracted anywhere near the friends or the readers that I've had over the last decade. I wouldn't have become a friend and a reader to a bunch of other people who wouldn't know anything about it. And also there's the question of entertainment and news. Yes, it can be corrosive. Yes, it can wear on you. But mainly if you use it wrong. If you're too much online, if you're on social media way too much, then it's gonna strip away. It's gonna erode your peace of mind. But the key there isn't social media. Social media is just on all the time. If you have too much oxygen, you'll also die. The key is self-control. A very tawdry and out-of-fashion phrase in the 21st century, but nevertheless, the key to everything. The key is self-control. It's not do without an email. What is this? A world without email? A world without email would be flatly, factually, objectively, a much, much poorer world. I don't mean financially. It would be a much lesser world. And if Cal Newport in this book, A World Without Email, as the title certainly suggests, if he suggests otherwise, he's just wrong. He's just being a Luddite in order to get clicks, in order to make money. I thought there was a lot of... I don't want to mistrust his motives, because he seemed like a straightforward person in Digital Minimalism, but nevertheless, Digital Minimalism was completely wrong. Just completely wrong. And A World Without Email, if it says that we should all do without email, it also is completely wrong. It's just ridiculous to take that kind of a stance, to plant that kind of a flag is just ridiculous. So we shall see. Probably there's more nuance in the book than there is in the title. We shall see. Then question number 2 is, what was the last truly great book that you read? I don't know about great here. I have always thought that ideally, what you would want before you start tossing around words like great and really meaning them. I mean, it's different to just colloquially say, oh, this was great. But if to toss around words like great and really mean them, ideally you would want, in addition to literary probity, in addition to your personal and aesthetic reactions, in addition to your objective reactions, your objective assessment of what the book does and doesn't do well, you'd also want an element of time. So in 2021, to do this tag for 2021 about recent reads, that element obviously is missing. But it deeply impressive, I can do. I don't know about great. Check with me in a year for great. But for deeply impressive, I want to mention A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, which is a nonfiction work, a collection of meditations on all the great Russian writers as we see them through the prism of their art as captured in short stories. Well, Russians are masters of short stories. They're a master of fiction. They're a master of massive, long bagatelle novels. They like I said, there's something in the water over there. It produces literary geniuses on a regular chock-a-block basis. And I went into this book not expecting it to be as good as it was. George Saunders seems to me to be a completely grounded and rooted guy. He seems like he's not the type whose fame has gone to his head. But even so, even when things seem that way, I have learned to be very cautious about authors as closet egomaniacs. And if a closet egomaniac does lectures about the great Russians, they're going to be about the closet egomaniac. I went into this book expecting that, but instead I learned a lot. I thought it was terrific about the great Russians. I thought it was terrific. I will, for a number of the authors in that work, and especially for the stories that are specifically mentioned, I doubt that I'll ever read them the same way as I did before I read this book. So I'm gonna list it, even though I'm not sure about the word great. Probably lots of flaws will come to my mind over the course of the year. Question number 3 is, if you could meet any writer, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you want to know? And for me, this would be probably one of the answers that wouldn't change from the last time I did it to now, because as I've said on this channel a few times, but there are a lot of you who are new, who might not know it. Whenever a question like this comes up, if you could have 6 dead authors around the table for dinner or something like that, who would they be? My answers to these questions are always personal and not literary or curiosity or historical. They're all authors that I have known and miss. And when it says who would they be and what would you want to know, I would just want to know how they're doing. I would just want to sit at a table and go through the latest New York Review books with them. That's all. I just want to have just a tiny, tiny taste of the literary conversations that we used to carry on by phone calls. That is, a telephone. You hook your finger underneath the opening in the back of the body of the phone, and you carry it as far as the wire that's connected to the wall would allow you, while you have the receiver, which is connected to the body of the phone by a curly plastic cord. You have that receiver crooked on your shoulder. So you've got 2 fingers underneath the phone, and you're walking around, and they've got the receiver crooked on your ear, and that gives you one hand free to pick up a piece of paper or read from a quote or pull a book down off a shelf. All of those physical protocols that don't exist anymore. They just don't exist anymore. There were those phone calls late into the night for endless hours, and there were also snail mail letters, mountains of them, where you put a piece of paper in a typewriter and you type out a page, and then you pull it out, put it on a pile, and type out the next page. Then you put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mail it off to the person and wait for 2 or 3 days for it to even get to them. And in your head the whole time, while you're walking to work or doing errands or walking the dog, you're doing the arithmetic. Okay, by now the letter has reached him. Okay, by now she must be working on a response. And then days later, by now I should have received a response. And the agony that entailed. Those of you who were born in the internet era, those of you who've never known anything but email, you'll never know the agony of that. Trust me when I tell you, texting someone, seeing on your screen that they've seen your text but they're not responding for an hour or 2 is not the same. It's not the same as sending off a snail mail letter and then waiting for it to get there, and for then it to be written, the response to be written and then posted and then get to you. But those are the people that I would have. It wouldn't be like, Shakespeare and whatnot. Question number 4, what books might we be surprised to find on your shelves? Same thing here. It's probably the same answer as I gave 4 years ago, which is that if you've watched my channel at all, probably you wouldn't be surprised to find much. I would like to think that by now I have accurately given you the impression that my tastes are pretty ecumenical. They're pretty lowercase c Catholic. I read a lot in a lot of different genres, eagerly, happily, indiscriminately, one might say. My friend Deb, when we did our best friends tag eons ago, when she could still come over here, when it got to the question who has the better taste in reading, she instantly said, "Oh, Steve will read anything. He'll read any kind of crap." So I have the better. She said, "I have the better taste because he'll read anything." That's absolutely true. I'm not. As I often say, your literary snobbery is not my problem. I'm not going to let your literary snobbery deny me an interesting or fun reading experience. So I range far and wide. I find it hard to believe that anybody looking at my shelves would really be surprised unless they found something like, I don't know, Cormac McCarthy or some author that I'm known to hate, some author that I'm known to repeatedly find absolutely no worth in. Then you'd probably be surprised to find that on my shelf, and that most of those people aren't here. So, question number 5 is, how do you organize your personal library? Once upon a time, probably the last time I did this tag, it would have been very spotty. There would have been a little bit of organization here and there, but not much in the way of anything systematic, especially in the rest of Hyde Cottage, not my little book room here. Because my little book room is just walls of books. That's all there is in here. Walls of books and a foam mattress, and that's all. And nothing else. No TV, no radio, no stereo, no nothing. There isn't even a working plug. There's no working socket in this room. And I'm not. This isn't quite the same room that I've usually filmed in. It's just a double of that room. Only this one doesn't appear to have a working wall socket. The ceiling light works, but the wall socket. There's one wall socket. It's got 6 outlets, and none of them appear to conduct electricity. And I don't. This change happened at New Year's, so I don't so much care. Although in the summer, I'm probably going to care whether or not I can run an electric fan in this room. I'll have to deal with that later on. But for right now, this is just a monk's cell. Right now, the only thing here is just books, and most of the books in this room aren't organized in any way. If there's a 2-book set, they'll be together. If there's a couple of books by the same author, they'll be together. The Penguins are all together. A lot of the mass market paperbacks are all together. There's a whole bookcase for romances that I don't think you can see from here. They're all together. But there's also a wonderful hodgepodge. There's a wonderful miscellany in this room. In the rest of Hyde Cottage, there's a lot more order than there was the last time I answered this question, for the simple reason that I moved. I changed locations just a bit. Not much, but just a bit. And as a result, there came a blessed, blessed interval where all the books were in neat piles on the floor and all the bookcases were empty. So I had the chance that all book lovers always dream of having, which is a total reset. I got to totally reset where all the books went. I had all the time in the world, all the leisure in the world, all the books completely there. They weren't in boxes, they weren't in storage, and all the bookcases freshly cleaned, freshly dusted, and freshly put against the walls in perfect order and all empty. So I got to organize, and as a result, a lot of the books in the other room are far more organized than they were. All the history together, all the biography together, all the science fiction together, all the romance together, all the nature together, all the science fiction together, that sort of thing, all the mystery novels together. They're far more organized than they were before. Not so much in this room. I kind of prize the chaos in this room, and I don't have. I mean, the reason why we'd organize books is to make. One of the reasons would be to find things easier. I don't have that problem in this room because with my little dog crooked in my arm like that, with her little paws on my shoulder and her face right there next to mine, I walk around that half circle about 1,000 times a day, pulling books down, looking at them, communicating with them, sometimes often using them. So in this room, I don't have any problem finding things. I know where everything is in this room. But in the rest, I have more organization because there was a move, which is why I've been experimenting with filming locations here, because my old setup just doesn't quite work. It almost does, but it doesn't quite work. Question number 6 is, what book have you always meant to read but haven't gotten around to yet? And for me, this is Adam Gentelson's Kill Switch, nonfiction work of his analysis of why the United States Senate, has stopped working. Why it is not a question anymore of them bums or whatever, but deeply ingrained, locked institutional dysfunction, where nothing important can get done. And the only major things that happen with party imprimaturs that usually mean harm to the citizenry of the people who elected those senators. And I haven't read this book yet, and I really want to, although it's 200 something pages long, and the answer to why the Senate is deadlocked and completely institutionally dysfunctional the way it is now is 2 words, not 200 pages. It's Mitch McConnell. It's Mitch McConnell. It's a man named Mitch McConnell. If he weren't there, if he were gone, if he lost his election, his recent re-election, he got re-elected for another 50 years or something like that, so he's never going to go anywhere. But if he did, everything would be different about the Senate. This is the point that I tried to make for 4 years when Donald Trump was president of the United States, and one after another talking head on cable news would say, well, he's really a symptom and not the disease. And I would say, no, he's the disease. He's the disease. Get rid of him and watch how things change. And I say the same thing about Mitch McConnell. Don't talk. I mean, I will perfectly happily read this book. This is a smart author, so he'll have a lot to tell me. But one of the things that I don't want to hear is that the Senate is inherently dysfunctional. Of course it's not. It's Mitch McConnell who doesn't want it to work. It takes pride in that fact. Alone, that one person. Now, he's gone from being Senate Majority Leader to Senate Minority Leader, but that's not going to make any bit of difference if the new Democratic Senate Majority Leader is what our friends in the UK would say, gormless. If the new Senate Democratic Majority isn't willing to play hardball, if they're going to conciliate with the Nazi Party, then it's not going to make a difference that Mitch McConnell is the Minority Leader and the Senate Majority Leader. If he were banished to the political wilderness, the Senate would change overnight. One person. So we'll see how much this book has to tell me on that. But the other part of this question is anything you feel embarrassed never to have read. And here my answer will be the same as 4 years ago and the same 4 years from now or 40 years from now, which is no. Embarrassment has nothing to do with this. Nothing at all. There is no right and wrong way to read. There are no good and bad people who read. There are no good and bad readers. This is not a priesthood. This is not a religion. There is not a designed, designated way to do this with a capital W. So no embarrassment, none, at not having read something. If you tell me you haven't read Pride and Prejudice, I'm not going to say that you should feel embarrassed. I'm still going to jump up and down like a monkey in the monkey house. I'm still going to scream and rant and try to mail you a copy of Pride and Prejudice right away. But not because you should be embarrassed not to have read it, just because it's so seminal and so enjoyable. I'm going to want you to get that experience right away. But it's not going to be a question, it's never going to be a question of, oh, I guess you're not a real reader then. No. And that is it's only that mind frame that would produce any hint of embarrassment about anything. And it shouldn't. Absolutely shouldn't. In this, as in so many other things, you youngins should take your page from the OGBG, from the Old Geezers book group, from this group of brawling old guys who've been doing dueling book hauls for months and months now. Watch their channels. You don't have to take it from me. Watch Jason Harrigan on his channel, or Mark Richardson on his channel. Mark Richardson, for instance, is a power behind the scenes in his little Vermont town. He's a library director, and therefore, has the reading of his charges in his hands. And the very idea that if he hasn't read X, Y, or Z, he should be a little embarrassed of that fact. I wouldn't mention it to him that way if I were you. I wouldn't mention that way to anybody in Vermont if I were you. Yeah, Mark is a perfect example. He's read as much as doctoral students have on all kinds of subjects, from nautical history to archaeology. Also loves Clive Cussler and Louis L'Amour. Is happy to mention it. Because there's no embarrassment here. None whatsoever. None at all. So no, there is no book that I feel embarrassed never to have read. Question number 7. Disappointing, overrated, not good. What book did you feel you were supposed to like but didn't? There's that supposed again. The people who think that reading works that way are very pernicious. They are very pernicious. Quite a few of them have booktube channels. And they think it's a priesthood. They think it's a religion, and they are a high priest. Or a high priestess. And they know the right way and the wrong way of things. And you're supposed to do this. And then once you're done with that, then you're supposed to read this. And then when you're done with that, and here are the opinions you're supposed to have, let's not forget that. It's not you're supposed to read these things in the wild al fresco. No, I will tell you what to read, and I will also strongly hint to you what you should think about it. And if you show signs of maybe wanting to think something else about it, well, I've got 130,000 subscribers on Twitter, and a lot of them know how to dox you and dox your kids and, throw a rock through your front window or contact the spouses of all the people who employ you to terrify them into getting their husbands to fire you. In other words, I have the means to coerce you if you don't agree to parrot the opinion that I think is right. There's a lot of people out there, even unfortunately on BookTube, who think of reading that way as a kind of mafia. That there's ways to do things. We won't always be explicit about it, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and you'd better wise up because you don't get to be off the reservation. So there's nothing about feeling like I'm supposed to read something, but I didn't. Although in my own case, not so much Casa Nostra as my profession. I am a professional book reviewer. And unlike a lot of other professional book reviewers, some of whom are friends of mine, I don't have a specialty. I have lots of subjects that I've reviewed a lot. I have lots of subjects that I know really well, but I don't have a specialty. I abhor them. So I am not the guy who writes mystery reviews. I am not the guy who reviews contemporary fiction. I am not the guy who's trotted out every month to review American Revolutionary history in the New York Review of Books or whatever. I don't have any pigeonhole like that. So major new releases in the 16 or 17 genres that I read, I do feel like I'm supposed to read them. I'm not meaning to contradict my earlier answers had to do with peer pressure, which should be absent from this completely. And I'm not talking about peer pressure because, as well-meaning as my fellow critics are, they don't read as much as I do. None of them even come close. so it's not quite peer pressure. It's rather self-imposed peer pressure. That if there's a brand new release in like the nature genre or American politics or something like that, I do feel like I am supposed to read it in a way, but it's all self-generated. The question also asked, do you remember the last book you put down without finishing? That doesn't really apply to me because I tend to finish what I start. But there is a book, not so much supposed to read, but read, was hyped, and kind of, sort of, in a way, disappointed me. It's Star Wars: The High Republic, the first book, called Light of the Jedi, by an author named Charles Sewell, who has written a huge amount of Star Wars comic books that are very good. He gets a lot of Star Wars very well. And it turns out, this is actually the first novel of his that I've ever read. I don't know if it's the first novel he's ever written, but it's the first prose of his that I've ever read that didn't have, comic book illustrations. It turns out he's a very, very readable author. And what's it called again? Light of the Jedi is chock full of invention. Just amazing. There's something new and fascinating idea or concept on almost every page. This is a new Disney Star Wars franchise set 200 years before the era of Luke Skywalker. So it's not the Old Republic that was part of the booming extended universe of Star Wars fiction that Disney Star Wars appears to want to scorn. They appear not to want to pretend. They want to pretend that the extended universe doesn't exist. But it's not the Old Republic. Instead, it's the High Republic. It's the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order at the very peak of their sunshine and influence, where warfare hasn't existed in centuries, where the Jedi just keep doing what they're doing, odd adventures, peacekeeping, that sort of thing. The Republic just keeps going on doing what it's doing. So a time that you might think doesn't have a whole lot in the way of dramatic potential. There's, of course, potential anywhere if you're a talented author. And it turns out Charles Sewell is a talented author. So I kind of had high hopes for, what's it called again? Light of the Jedi. The reason why I keep having to check the title is a very good indication of what I thought of the book, which is that it's kind of bland. It is very inventive, but it's kind of bland. The title, of course, is incredibly bland, but a lot of the rest of it was too. And I'm not really getting hung up on how much of it. There are quite a few ideas in Light of the Jedi that run counter to what I consider to be Star Wars canon, where things happen in the course of the novel where I think, okay, but that doesn't really make sense if the rest of Star Wars makes sense. Are you inventing stuff here? And if so, is it with Lucasfilm's approval? It must be, because Lucasfilm's put a lot of time and money into this High Republic franchise. It's going to have, I think, a cartoon or a live action TV show or a cable show. It's going to have all sorts of merchandise. There are comic books. And that was another thing that sort of had my guard up, my quills up when I was going into this thing, is that the comic book of the High Republic, the first issue, I don't think the first issue has come out yet, but it's already generated a huge amount of commentary from this segment of the comic book, the Star Wars comic book internet community. All of those words are wrong in one way or another, especially community. There are active, neck-bearded Star Wars fans on YouTube, here on our own home of YouTube. Collectively, I think you could probably use the term that they use, the Fandom Menace, who hate the current woke drift of Star Wars since it was owned by Disney and operated by Kathleen Kennedy, a woman named Kathleen Kennedy, who you might not know any of this trivia, but you might remember seeing a glimpse in Entertainment Weekly of her wearing a T-shirt that said "The Force is female," and a lot of those Fandom Menace YouTube channels are very enjoyable to watch, and a lot of them have made the same. They make a lot of points that I don't agree with. They make a lot of points that are generated, I think, because they monetize anger rather than because they're making any kind of sincere reflection of their own opinions. But one opinion that they say about the High Republic that I do agree with is that this is not a boardroom full of creative people saying, what are the interesting stories that we can tell about this particular period in a galaxy far, far away, long, long ago that George Lucas originally invented. Let's pick a period in its long history and see what kinds of stories we can tell in that time period. This is not a group of creative people doing that. This is a group of creative people who don't like Star Wars, who're not interested in it, didn't go to any of the movies, didn't read any of the books, didn't read any of the comic books, getting together in a room and saying, the one thing that we know about Star Wars in the books, in the comics, in the movies especially, for the last 50 years, is that the wrong people have been Jedis. And we need to fix that. We need to be better. And we need to make all of the fans of Star Wars, the ones who are 10 years old, the ones who are 50 years old, we need to make all of them better too. It's not a question of telling, involving stories with complex characters. It's social work. We need to make them better. They are right now, those fans right now are mired in half a dozen different prejudices. And they probably don't know it because they're not as self-aware as we are, who is, after all. So we need to help them. And that's what this is going to be. It's not, we don't really care about the story or the characters. We care about helping those fans. If we get any kind of resistance, if they even so much as mention that it's obvious we don't care about the stories and the characters, well, we know what to do then, don't we? Then slander is the one and only response that we have. Certainly not self-reflection. Certainly not, is this a kind of weak story? Are these pasteboard characters designed to check boxes rather than to be interesting? It won't be that. Instead, it'll be, well, I've tried to help you, but if you're not willing to let go of your prejudices, then you're probably just a bigoted Nazi, right? I'm sorry about that. I wish it weren't true. But if you don't like any of the things that we're doing because they all seem threadbare and one-dimensional, well, probably you should abandon Star Wars then, because what we're doing isn't for you. Star Wars: The High Republic reeks of that kind of thinking, just reeks of it. And that's off-putting. That's extremely off-putting. But I was pleased to see that's not anywhere in Charles Soule's novel. That kind of attitude is all over the franchise, but it's not really. And the novel is very energetic, but it's just a Star Wars novel. I guess all of the furor around the whole brand was making me think this would either be the greatest Star Wars novel ever written, or it would be Satan incarnate, and it's neither one of those. It's just one of Charles Soule's comic arcs, the 6 issues of one comic story, only with lots of prose. Now that's no small thing, because plenty of comic book writers try to write prose and they're horrible at it. And you look no further than Chris Claremont. So it's a pleasure to see that isn't true in this case. I enjoyed it in a way, but I absolutely, positively did not care about any of the characters in the book when I shut the book. When I read the last page, I did not care about any of them. And that is not true of many earlier Star Wars novels that I have read, even non-canonical ones like Alan Dean Foster, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, one of the first Star Trek novels that wasn't part of the movie series. In fact, it might be the first one that was not a movie. And there are minor characters in that book that I still remember. Now, Alan Dean Foster is a terrific novelist, much better than Charles Soule, but even so, we shall see. There's another Star Wars High Republic novel, I think, coming out in March, and I'll give it a try, and we'll see. So that's if this question is generally getting at a kind of what was your latest anticlimax, that will do. Question number 8 is, what kinds of stories are you drawn to? Are there any that you steer clear of? And I am largely drawn to stories where the author writes in good faith. That's the main thing that I care about. The author has to write in good faith, no matter what they're doing. If they're doing something, fiction or history, if they want to bring the complexity, if they want to not underestimate my intelligence, that would be great. But they've got to be doing what they're doing in honest faith. They can't be trying to game the system. They can't be trying to make any kinds of High Republic style ulterior motive points. They can't be doing anything like that. They've got to be trying their hardest to entertain and enlighten. The job of all writing. And if I get the sense that they are dealing plainly with me, that's what I tend to gravitate towards. And I hate, talk about not gravitate towards, I hate books where I don't get that impression, where I get the opposite impression. The author's trying to do something, game me in some way. Hate that. Absolutely hate it. I read a lot of that, unfortunately. Question number 9 is, if you could require the president to read one book, what would it be? Of course, I had only grim tidings to look forward to the last time I did this, but the president right now is Joe Biden, who does occasionally have time to read. Not the world's biggest reader, and he's very much along the lines of fun adventure stories. Clive Cussler, Len Dayton, that sort of thing. But I would recommend, it's not his cup of tea, I don't think, and I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't have the time to do it. But there's a new book that I read. It's not out yet, but it's by Bruce Levine, and it's called Thaddeus Stevens. It's a biography of the great senator, the great congressman and abolitionist Thaddeus Stevens, who was a firebrand against slavery long before the Emancipation Proclamation, long before he convinced Abraham Lincoln to think that way. He was saying that everywhere, and he hasn't had a major biography in quite some time. And this one Levine's book is very good, and it's not just about abolition; it's also about the Congress of Thaddeus Stevens' day. So that might appeal to Joe Biden, who was a creature of Congress for decades. So I'd recommend that. But as in all cases, when it comes to this sort of thing, I'd be far more interested in hearing what he is reading than recommending something to him. And then question number 10. Bet you thought we'd never get here. This is a day for long videos, I guess. What do you plan to read next? Well, the shorthand answer to this question is everything. But I did jot down some titles that are on my immediate horizon. There is The Triumph of the Moon by Ronald Hutton. This is a new history of modern pagan witchcraft from the author of a little book called The Witch, that came out probably 4 years ago, something like that, right around that time, that was remarkably well received. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It was a history and study of the witch, of the figure of the witch in largely Western societies. I was amazed at how far and wide that book got reviewed. It made me wish that I'd kept my copy of it. I didn't keep my copy of it, or I would have stuffed it with those reviews. And this is a new book by Ronald Hutton about modern pagan witchcraft, what it's like, who practices it, what their texts are, their rituals, and that sort of thing. And I'm looking forward to reading it. Of course, I will offer the same caveat that I when I read it, that I would offer now, and that I offer in all cases like this, which is that this is a historical study. There is no such thing as witchcraft. There is no such thing as magic. There is no supernatural element to existence. None of any kind. No witches, no warlocks, no magic, no ghosts, no afterlife, no miracles, no nothing. There is no supernatural element to life. None. I would offer that caveat. This is not a book about something. This is a book about human thought about something. The thing at the heart of it, witchcraft, doesn't actually exist. But Hutton was great in his book about witches, so I'm looking forward to this. Then the next one is The Murder Between Us by Tal Bauer, who I think is self-published. I'm pretty sure this isn't his first book. He's prolific. Love to know the details. Maybe I should put out feelers and see if he'd be willing to talk to me on camera. That would be so much fun. I have a million questions for him and people like him who produce one self-published book every other month, it seems like. He's incredibly prolific, and The Murder Between Us it's a gay love story about an FBI profiler who has been burned and hurt in the romantic side of his life, and an FBI agent who are brought to the same Iowa town for the same reason, because a serial killer has resurfaced, and their expertise, both their different kinds of expertise, are needed. And in addition to the murder between us that they have to work on and solve, they also come to know each other. And it sounds like I've read a couple of other books by this guy, and they were rock solid, by the numbers, but rock solid. This will probably be the same. I'm looking forward to it, certainly. Now I'm thinking about interviewing him. That might be a lot of fun, if he'd be willing. Maybe he wouldn't. And then the last one, totally fascinating. Can't wait to get to it. It's called Come Fly the World. It's by Julia Cook, and it is a history, a study of Pan Am stewardesses in the golden era of commercial flight, airline flight, where Pan Am stewardesses had to be so qualified. They had to be polished in every way, not just their appearance. Far from it. The appearance was way down on the list. They had to be polished in a lot of other ways. The Pan Am knew that they were ambassadors, as well as anything else, as well as customer service or anything like that, that they were so much more than that they were the face of the business. And this book sounds fantastic. It sounds like the kind of book that I've been waiting to read on those old stewardesses, on those old professionals, the old style professionals who knew and did so much, saw the world, had opportunities that their sisters back at home did not have. And who, just to end this long video on another anti-PC note, would have been the first people to scoff at the modern SJW PC crowd who says that if you use the word stewardess instead of flight attendant, they will, say it with me now, dox you, dox your wife, dox your children, get you fired, have your house firebombed, and reduce you to penury or starvation, even though you make a groveling apology online. That group of people that we have put in power over ourselves now forbids the word stewardess. They forbid you to use it, on pain of all of those things. You will be driven from your job, driven from your life, your spouse and your children will be alienated from the world, you will be driven to penury, starvation, and then death, as the penalty for doing something they don't like. And the thing they don't like in this particular case is using the word stewardess, because it's rampantly sexist. Of course, the ladies who were these Pan Am stewardesses would have scorned such children. Said, honey, come back to me when you have something real to complain about. But I want to read about these ladies. I absolutely do. And this book, I forget when it's coming out, but it's definitely on my list for as soon as I can get it. And there you go, at enormous length. Good Lord, what's wrong with the videos today? That is the New York Times by the book tag. I'm not going to tag anybody because this video has gone on hideously long as it is. I'm just gonna leave off and try to make a shorter video. I will end this for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.